Hey, it's Sylvan, and this is the Handpan Podcast. Today, I am delighted to bring you not one, but two new podcast episodes. We're going to call it a part one and a part two, but these are two different conversations I had with my new friend, Michael Barticel. Michael is the host of the Good People Effect podcast. It's a show about purpose, adventure, and creativity, and it's got a whole lot of handpan stories too. Michael kindly invited me on his podcast, and we had such a good time that I asked him if he'd be willing to be on the Handpan podcast. I'm so glad he agreed. That's kind of why I called this episode There's More to That Story. And we're bringing you both conversations right here on the Handpan podcast, as well as on the Good People Effect podcast. This episode, part one, is Michael interviewing me. So if you've been curious to hear more about my own story, well, this is your chance. And part two is me interviewing Michael, whose life, it seems, could be made into a movie someday. Michael is kind, humble, and honest, and I'm grateful he reached out. I definitely made a new friend, and I'm excited to share these conversations with you because they were so refreshing and inspiring to me. So here we go.
How's it going? How's life? Talk to me.
Good. How are you, Michael? It's nice to connect.
It's great to connect. I was just thinking the same thing today. I was like, here's another podcaster that also has a show that's, has the handpan as a key element. And it was funny when I came across you. I was like, I really need to reach out to this guy and just see if we can, have a chat. I just feel like it would be interesting.
Well, I'm so glad you did, because it's not very often that we take a chance and reach out to someone completely new. And, whenever I've done that in my life, the outcomes and the new ideas that have come out of that have really changed the trajectory of my life. So I'm glad that you decided to email me out of the blue. I'm glad you persevered because summer was busy and it took me a while to get back to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said. I mean, when you do kind of take those chances and go into these unknown directions and you just go with how you feel, it usually ends up being something great. So, I've been really looking forward to this chat today, and I really enjoy your podcast, the Handpan podcast. It's been a delight to listen to. But I guess I just wanted to interview you for a change because you speak to a lot of people, and it's very different. Having like when you're as a podcaster to be interviewed yourself, it just kind of changes things up again. So I just wanted to know, like, how did all this journey begin, and can you take me, I know it's a difficult question in some respect, but can you take me back to the beginning?
Sure. And again, I want to reiterate that it's extremely kind of you to ask me to be on your show. And you're right, it is kind of funny to be on the opposite side of a podcast.
Yeah.
But it's exciting too, because you're right, when you do a podcast, you don't necessarily get to share your story as much. But my story started in a pretty unremarkable way. And I don't mean that in any negative sense, but I'm from France. I was born in France. My entire family is French. My grandparents, my great-grandparents. There was nothing international in my background. I think I never got on a plane until I was 18. I never traveled as a kid. And in 2011, I moved to the United States as an exchange student, and I've lived here ever since. And that's been one of the greatest adventures of my life, one of the things that I'm the most proud of. It's been difficult, but so much meaning has come out of this experience. So that's a little bit about where I'm from and where I live now. I think something that might help your listeners kind of get a sense for who I am, because when you press the play button, you hear a new voice. You don't always know who who you're hearing from. Long before I knew anything about psychology, long before I had a notion of my personality or temperament, I think it's later in life that we develop these psychological frameworks that help understand how we see the world and how we see ourselves in it. I've always operated emotionally. I'm of a melancholic temperament, which means that I tend to experience very strong feelings, very high highs of ecstasy, and very low lows. And so that kind of helps frame who I am and what I'm drawn to. I am very sensitive to art and beauty. And one of the things that I really kind of recognize in retrospect is that I am a contrarian. What this means is I'm drawn to the unique, to the special, to the extraordinary. And as you know, you mentioned the handpan, and I know you play the handpan as well. We're within that realm, right? And so that's played a big role in my life.
So besides the handpan, where else have you been able to find this kind of uniqueness in life?
I am drawn to philosophy and faith. I think that this life that we live, even though the way that we experience it is ordinary, right? The mundane routine, the daily grind, it is still amazing, right? To think that you and I, we were born without our own permission. From the day you get on this earth, there's a countdown, not to be, gloomy or anything, but it's almost like we arrive too late. By the time we get here, there's already a countdown. And this theme of finitude is very prevalent in philosophy. So I'm drawn to these really big concepts that have no really tangible answer, but I think they do provide some value for our day-to-day. As I said, I'm drawn to the special, to the unique. And so when life gets boring, when you get stuck, I think these bigger questions can lead you to a well-being through, primarily thankfulness and gratitude. Because even though we didn't choose this life, you didn't choose where you were born, when you were born, the color of your skin, your gender, your social, economic background. You do live, and you're here, and that's all you know. That's all I know, and we can resent it, or we can take it as a gift. And so this is where I find meaning in my life as well.
Like you mentioned, philosophy and faith. And do you feel like going away as an exchange student in any way kind of connected to that, enhanced that?
It's an incredibly powerful and impactful experience to go study abroad or to go travel. You don't have to live there or to study there. What it does is, I don't know if you've ever heard the image of the fish in water. So the fish is swimming in water. Water is clear, it's invisible. And really the fish has no idea that there's this thing called water all around him. But if you take the fish out of water, it's gasping for air. It doesn't know its new environment, and it realizes, looking back, hey, that was water. I think moving abroad or traveling in general, or opening yourself to new experiences, trying something new for the first time, it does that. You look back and you realize that what you thought was what you thought was maybe a universal truth, it was just water. It was just one thing, and it kind of gives you a new perspective on that. So it truly did that for me. Now, the whirlwind of emotions and inspirations and insights that you get from an experience traveling or moving abroad, at the time you sort of ride it like a wave. You don't interpret that. You don't really make sense of that. But in retrospect, you can find those themes. And
I feel like in some way, my first trip abroad, I'm not sure if it would have been the same as an exchange. I mean, I've never been on an exchange, but just traveling anywhere, it really opens you up. And I found in my own experience, it opened me up a lot towards what you were mentioning earlier. This feeling of connection, this feeling of growth. You're pondering these questions that even if you might not know the answer, or the answers might seem like they're a bit of a paradox, then just pondering the question and just kind of thinking in that kind of a way opens you up to different ideas and thoughts. But I feel like travel has, in my own journey, has had a real deep responsibility for that, or at least has added to it.
yeah, that makes complete sense. Did you start traveling early in your life?
I started traveling quite young. I went on a few smaller trips, and I was lucky enough to, get some travel in quite early. And I feel like, even though I don't really remember a lot of the experiences, and I know that they've kind of they've washed over me in a way and had some kind of residual effect.
Yeah, that makes sense because it opens a door to something new. And I think that as much as there is value exploring what is in our own minds and understand who we are individually, um, a lot of the insights that we get in this life are through books, so someone else's teachings, through podcasts like yours, asking questions to a new person, getting new insight, traveling, being exposed to something new that questions the way you live, and it makes you realize, hey, it is possible to live another way. It is not necessary to live the way I have lived. So these are deep things, and they're incredibly rich.
How do you feel like your trajectory was changed once you encountered the handpan?
Okay, how much time do we have? um, you know, when I discovered the hong, and the hong was the first invention, which later, paved the way for this category of instruments called handpans. But the hong, really, in short, was invented in Switzerland by a company named Panart. And it was truly a discrete revolution, which is the name of a documentary that was made about the hong in 2008. The hong, just to let your listeners know a little bit more, although I'm sure they've heard about the handpan before on your show, it's this incredibly remarkable instrument. Why? Because it's intentional. A piano, a guitar, has all the different notes in the Western scale. They're chromatic instruments. They're mechanical. They're incredibly intimidating to learn. And they're associated with an institutional path, going to music school or conservatory. What the hong offered was creative freedom, because they didn't even call it a musical instrument. They called it a sound sculpture, because I think they knew that putting labels on things can deter certain individuals from even believing they can approach this thing. So the reason why this was remarkable is because by default, this was an instrument that bypassed entirely the status or the hierarchy of the music world, and it bypassed entirely the fear of doing it wrong. You approach a piano today, you're afraid of doing it wrong. With the hung, it's a diatonic instrument. It's in only one scale, so only specific keys of your piano are on that instrument, which means that you can't really play a wrong note. It all sounds harmonious and beautiful and rich and layered. And it very much aligns with this idea that less is more. You have a finite instrument with 8, 9, maybe 10 notes. And out of finitude, you create infinity.
Yeah, it's. I've often heard you speak about this on your show. I think you spoke about it in a recent episode as well. You were talking about how the simplicity of the pan. It's simple on one hand, but it's infinitely complex on the other. And there's so many options when you're kind of confined to what you have. And I do find it's quite interesting. I've got a strange attraction to strange instruments or unique instruments or instruments that just produce a sound that I've never heard before. And I find a kind of connection with instruments that are easy to learn. I feel like with the handpan, it's really easy to learn, but it's obviously difficult to master, and that's something that really attracts me. I feel as though when you're playing this instrument, you're making these beautiful sounds, which kind of motivates you to keep going. And I feel like it would be a great first instrument, because I feel like in some way you learn about the art of learning in a way, builds a sense of discipline, I guess, if you're practicing regularly, and it shows you the pattern of learning. And I think that's one of the many, many great things about the handpan.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's often described as a gateway instrument. It's allowed countless non-musicians a chance to belong, a chance to create, a chance to be a part of making art. And you can't do that with any musical instrument. And you also touched on the art of learning. I think that our world has often got the art of learning or teaching wrong because, think about school. You are taught to be competitive. You're taught to pass tests. You are taught to do it right. You're not really taught to enjoy the process. It's kind of all about the destination. And we all know that we remember very little about what we actually learned in school. But what would be really valuable is to remember and have really assimilated the joy of learning. So in a sense, the handpan, I think, especially in the early days of the hung, it offered a way for people to create simply, and that, for some of them, for me, it changed my life.
Can you tell me a little bit about how it changed your life and kind of like your first encounters with the instrument? Because you've been playing for quite a while now. It's like something like 13 or 14 years, right? So that's quite a long time, and it's much longer than I've even known that the handpan or the hung existed. Like I only heard about it, probably four years ago. So I'm super curious to know, at such an early stage of the instrument's life, kind of how did you guys cross paths? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, and it's interesting if you use a tool like Google Trends, which is a fascinating tool. If you just Google Trends and type any sort of keyword or search term, you can look up the global search interest or local search interest over time for specific topics or ideas or Yeah. And so for the handpan or for the hong, you can see that there was literally no interest nor no significant um, interest as a trend before the year 2008. And that's when YouTube blew up and a few YouTube videos got viral, and it's kind of helped spread the word about this Swiss instrument. But I guess back to your question. So I was incredibly fortunate, so privileged to discover the Hong in its infancy when it was totally unknown. And the handpan is still relatively unknown. But um, I have a cousin who is named David Charrier, and he's a very prominent handpan player in the global handpan community. Um, and in 2005, there was a little family reunion organized at my parents' house, and he brought his hong. So that's how I got introduced to the instrument. I had a visceral, kind of a gut reaction about it. The following night, I dreamed of the sound of the hong all night, and the next day I woke up, I was totally obsessed. And I haven't had a lot of those kinds of experiences in my life. So I knew that I just had to get one. They were very rare at the time. And so it took me 2 years to be able to acquire my hong. And then really the reason why it changed my life, which I know sounds so cliche and so generic, but what it did is it empowered me. It made me believe that I could create. I've mentioned the terms status, which you could think the comparison trap, comparing yourself to others. I've mentioned the term fear, the fear of doing it wrong. What the hong provided me with was an environment totally free from status, because there were no hong players. I mean, apart from my cousin, I didn't know any other hong players for a long time. There was no community at the time. No cool kids and the top players, and there was just none of that. There was no status. And because of the nature of the instrument, which I described, which is very forgiving, very intuitive, the ergonomics they feel feels very natural to play. It's not awkward at all. It means there was no fear of doing it wrong. And so I started creating, and I started enjoying the process, and I developed pleasure from this new thing that I was able to do, which was to create music. And the thing is, when you do that, when you create and create some more, no matter what your background is or how good you are at music beforehand, or if you're not a musician, you become better, magically. Duh. You do something a lot and you become better. And if really what you've invested in was the process, the joy of playing, then you're almost unstoppable, because you have that's your secret ingredient. That's the weapon that helps you to go the distance, right?
I just wanted to know what kind of challenges did you face on this journey with the handpan? Like, if you were to think back, what kind of things did you face that kind of, might have been roadblocks since you began with the instrument?
Yeah, that's an incredibly good question. I just described this really high, right? This mountaintop moment where you get vision and you're so excited. Over the years, as I got the chance to travel with my music, to put out music and to record music, to meet friends across, countries and continents, and to make new connections. I think sometimes you can lose your original spark, what got you into it in the first place. So there was a few things like, one of the incredibly exciting experiences that I got to live is I had a couple of viral videos. my cousin David and I played a lot of Hong music together. And in 2008 and 2009, we had a couple of videos. One of them is called Hong Insomniac Jam. I think it has over 4 million views on YouTube. There's a few others. And so now this was fun, right? It's really fun to experience a measure of success. It's exciting. I remember one of these videos got shared on Facebook by Ricky Martin.
Ricky Martin? Are you serious?
Yeah,
That's crazy.
Yeah. Not that I'm into his music, but
what do you mean? You don't like Ricky Martin? Are you serious? Cup of Life?
I'm not familiar with. I told you I'm a contrarian.
Is the best karaoke song in the world. Group karaoke. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, I will listen to it after this conversation. I'm sure it's gonna be good. You don't get to the top by making bad music, but
yeah. So you reach this level of success.
Yeah, and so then the thing is, what got you into it was the freedom of the joy of playing. Maybe we'll talk about it later, but the tagline of my podcast is the simple joy of creating. And I hold on to that dearly, because when you lose the simple joy of creating, and you start worrying about what is expected of you, because think about it, you have a video that performs well. Well, hold on now. What are we going to make the next video about? We needed to perform at least as well, right? So there's these expectations. There's also, a certain sense of status. In spite of my own approach, I think in those early years, now people have completely forgotten, but I think there are a few people who put me on a pedestal because of this relative success, which, quite frankly, viral videos, there's no science to it. It's being at the right place at the right time. It's not based on merit, is what I'm saying. But I think you start infusing status and comparison, and you alter with that original spark. What lit you up at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And so that leads to being stuck or bored or disappointed, and it brings you to this place of maybe cynicism.
So how did you reconnect from that place to a simple joy of creating?
2 words: rediscover wonder.
Talk to me about that.
So what got you into this thing at first? It was the beauty, it was the creativity, the freedom. There's an attitude of a contemplative attitude towards art and beauty. And maybe here's an image. It might be imperfect, but there's a sunrise and a sunset every single day for all of us. I miss most sunrises because I don't wake up early enough, but I try to catch a good amount of sunsets. You can get used to sunsets. And I think that if you apply that same approach to rediscover wonder, and you contemplate the beauty of a sunset that, by the way, is worth remarking on, because so many people take pictures of sunsets. Like you look at a sunset, it's beautiful, it's awesome, but you can disconnect with that.
That's an amazing way of putting it. I've never heard that put so eloquently before, and it really does draw. It makes an easy connection in our minds because we can all picture that. So thank you. That's I love the way you put that.
I'm glad it's helpful.
Yeah. Because it is. I mean, it is an important lesson. We hear it all the time, thrown around in ways that like live in the moment, for example, or be present. And sometimes it's very hard to, just remind ourselves, of the beauty around us and just the beauty in everyday life that has always been there, always will be there. But it's up to us to kind of open up and see that. And it's so interesting how that simple joy, can kind of get lost sometimes. But I find it so remarkable that you've been able to recognize that and put effort in and get it back.
And I think that it's also something that we have to share.
Yeah.
When you, here's another sort of quote or illustration that I love. The biggest sin in the desert is to find water and not tell anyone about it.
Mm.
So when you've found something that has been so good to you, so transformative, you have to share it. And so I think that while rediscovering wonder is a very individual process, sharing the simple joy of creating has been also a way to appreciate and further this thing. And we are meant to. We are relational beings. We are meant to share the good things in our lives, and I think the handpan has been an incredibly, although amazing art form, it's been an incredibly tense art form and dramatic art form. Why? Because from day one, there's been an incredible amount of scarcity. So there was only one company in the world, Panart, that produced the Hong between the year 2000 and the year 2009, when the first handpan makers arrived. So if you're in, you're really happy. If you're out, you're desperately craving for that thing that these people have and that you don't have. You see the tension there? Now it's a little better because there are a lot more handpan makers, and
Yeah, it's just blown up, hasn't it?
it really has. Yeah.
And it, like you said, it's still in its infancy. You mentioned earlier, but yeah, it's interesting to see, or even to reflect back on that tension and how it's changed over time. I want to touch on something before we dive a little bit deeper into your podcast. It's something you mentioned a little bit earlier. I wanted to know what was the experience like when you first got your handpan, or you got your hands on a handpan, and you started playing with your cousin, and you guys were like jamming together in the early days. What was that experience like with David?
Looking back, it was unbelievably fortunate that I had a buddy to play music with, day and night. We had an amazing chemistry, on top of being relatives. We just had this chemistry, which I've found over the years playing with countless other musicians, is rare. It's very rare to find that kind of chemistry. So it's a symbiotic thing, and it's entrancing, it's enchanting. These were passionate years, right? The kind of passion that you will skip breakfast and lunch and dinner to record this song,
That's the best. So in regards to the podcast, how did this come about? Because this was a fairly recent thing, right?
Yep. Yeah, so I started the podcast roughly a year ago, in the fall of 2018. I think I did it for two reasons, and I'm just thinking out loud here. The first one is I'm a podcast junkie. I love podcasting as an art form. Also because it's new and nascent, and it's kind of on the edges, right? So I'm drawn to the special community that's forming around podcasts. So I knew I wanted to do a podcast about anything, but probably about handpans. The handpan podcast was actually started a couple years prior by my friend David Gallagher.
Chef D.
Yeah, who's now a handpan maker located in Hawaii.
There's some nice pans, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely. He's doing amazing work.
Yeah, my brother got one recently, actually. I can't wait to just try it out.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. So yeah, talk to me.
Yep. So he started the podcast. He did it for 1 year, and then it was time to transition. So I knew that he owned the domain name, and he had sort of built the brand around it.
Yeah.
I wanted to go a completely different direction, but I still messaged him, and I asked him, with utmost respect, what you've done was foundational. I'm thinking about starting a podcast. Is there any chance that you're willing to pass this on and to sort of give it a second life through me? And he said yes in a heartbeat. He's just so kind. And as you
He's a
know,
great guy. Yeah.
absolutely. And he had moved on to making handpans. So he was on to bigger and better things. And so that's sort of how, I picked up the Handpan podcast. All first legacy episodes, all 10 legacy episodes from David are still available, on iTunes and other places where you can get podcasts.
I think as well as your podcast, I think if people are into podcasts, they should definitely, check out some of the older episodes. You said they're available?
Yep, I think they're available on iTunes. I don't think that he had submitted them through Spotify. Back then, perhaps Spotify was not into podcasts back then. But yeah, actually, if people want a snapshot of the culture of the handpan community in 2016, I think it's just a beautiful, way back machine, a travel back in time to get a sense for where it was at as opposed to where it's at today. And it's definitely a part of just a few pieces of super valuable historical content around the handpan.
I think there's so many beautiful things about the instrument. Like we've touched on a lot today, and I feel like it's a deeply personal instrument, and the community that's been formed around it, because it's just got this kind of gravitational pull, doesn't it? Because it's just something so different and just kind of connects with you on another level. I feel like for me, it reconnected me with nature. It got me through hard times, and it exposed me to, different people, different ways of thinking, like we mentioned earlier, when you change your vantage point on things through travel and things like this, and through the handpan, you really, I don't know, get another perspective on things, and you open your mind up to different ways of thinking. And I feel like the handpan is such a beautiful instrument, and just because of that, it brings together a really unique set of people that really, it's hard not to get along with these people in this community. Like you really need to try hard, because they're really beautiful people, and everyone's got their own story, as everyone does in life. But within this community, you just feel really warm and welcome from the beginning, and it's just around the music as well, the musical element. And it's not just handpans within the community, because there's jam nights and people get together, and I don't know, it's just such a wonderful thing. Do you have anything to say more about the community so people might get a better idea of kind of what happens at a handpan gathering? Or
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you mentioned, this idea that it's impacted people each individually in their own lives, and every person has their own story. That's what the Handpan podcast is about. It's highlighting, it's telling the story of a handpan friend after another. So each episode is dedicated to one person, to one story. And the cool thing about stories is, the 3 acts, right? There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. In all of our stories, and I listened to a few of your episodes, and I actually really, really enjoyed the first episode of your podcast, where you explain a little bit of the purpose and the motive behind starting this project. In your story, there's an event that deviates your life, and that leads to a transformation. And that's what really I'm interested in this community. I think because the handpan is fairly niche still, it's not very commercial. Um, I actually think we live in the golden age of handpans, but we can get into that later. I think it does tend to attract very interesting people, um, and it leads to a kind of transformation. And if you pay attention, if you listen to these stories, it's oftentimes along the lines of healing, or maybe opening your heart to being sensitive to the beauty that even you can make, the music that you can make. Um, there are stories of community, obviously, but I think that the handpan is a deeply personal thing. Um, and what I mean by that is it's a transportable instrument that you can bring with you anywhere. You don't need to plug into an amp. You don't need to coordinate band practice to play. You can play by yourself anywhere, anytime. And that has led each of these people who do come together at gatherings to develop a passion, to define their relationship with this instrument.
Yeah, it's like almost a style with the instrument, isn't it? It's like their own way. It's their own individual journey. But it's funny how everyone's got their own individual journey that's so unique and special to them. But then it's all kind of connected at the same time.
Yeah, and it's quite beautiful, right? When you it's a little bit how it feels to have this conversation with you today. Like, we are connected through the handpan, and I think through some umbrella themes as well of creativity and entrepreneurship and living with purpose and seeking out adventures. But these people who go to these gatherings, I mean, I was just at an event in North Carolina about 3 weeks ago, put together by Chef D, David Gallagher, and Josh Rivera, who, by the way, just launched his brand new handpan brand. He's making his own handpans under the name Veritas.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so fascinating. I need to write him a message and just say, congratulations that he's on this. That's so wonderful. He's been an amazing. He was tuning handpans for quite a long time, wasn't he?
Yes, and I think he made it out to Australia, right?
Yeah, I met him a few times at Panos. That's the only handpan gathering I've actually gone to, and I can't wait to go to another one and experience that. But that's actually where I first met Josh, and is a lot of fun having jams with him. But it makes me smile so from ear to ear to hear that he's now making handpans, and I can't wait to hear them. That's great.
Yeah, they're beautiful instruments. I just played on a number of them, and he's just an awesome dude, and I know he's going to do very well. But at these events or through these connections, you meet for the first time or you chat for the first time, but it feels like you've known each other forever. And so that's the kind of culture that wow, that's powerful. Like, where else does this happen in the culture? At least, in the West, it doesn't really happen. Culturally speaking, Westerners are not very good at talking to strangers. And so the community, although I think not central to the passion around the handpan, it's been just a wonderful fruit of this intentional instrument, right? It's been the outcome, not the reason for, but the outcome of a brilliant idea, an intentional design, and just all in all, something pointing back to beauty and wonder.
Yeah, it is such a special thing. Coming back to your podcast for a second, and just talking about kind of your journey with that and these amazing stories that are really, you do really touch on some interesting points in the stories, and you find out, you dive pretty deep and you find out, the core of things, and you ask some really potent questions, in my opinion. Where's this all going, and what's your idea of kind of Which direction is it heading in at the moment?
So I view the Handpan podcast as a sound journal of my own personal connections with folks as I navigate this world around this instrument called the handpan. Um, some of the things I want to watch out for is to go into autopilot mode, right? So I don't want to adhere to a super strict schedule because I'm not monetizing this project. There's no advertisers. I do have some merch on a site, but it's drop shipping. So if people buy it, I think I get $1 per order because if I'm not,
You want to keep things natural, right?
yeah, yeah. So no advertising, no outbound marketing. It's purely, I guess, the friends and the network and the community that I've built that are tuning in, and anyone who's interested in a possible handpan podcast, sort of journeying in the ride.
What I think it's a great resource, especially for anyone thinking about getting into the handpan community or people that have seen a video and just a little bit curious about what they are. I mean, we've covered a lot of good stuff today, but I mean, you've got a great blog on your website where people can see, what, why they're so expensive, for example, or different scales, and find out a little bit more about them. And you've got the podcast where you speak to cool people, and you're leaving things in a natural way. I think that's it gives it a little bit of, I don't know what the word is, je ne sais quoi in French. I think it gives it a little bit of
good French, Michael.
Yeah, that's all I know. Gives it just a little bit of something special that you don't really find a lot in today's world. I mean, it's something really unique, and I think that's a great thing. So, for anyone that's out there that's interested in a handpan at all, you should definitely check out Sylvain's stuff, because I really appreciate that, because I know how easy it is to, like you said, lose the love of something when it becomes just, there's some kind of a goal that you're working towards, and it just becomes like really repetitive and monotonous, and something that you used to love so much or find so much joy in has kind of started to slip away.
Yeah. And like, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I am drawn to the special, to the extraordinary. And so I'm going to do this thing the only way I know how to, the only way I can do it, which is to help people rediscover wonder and find the beauty in that specific sound model or that other scale. Even if I tried, I could not try to dumb this down to say choose option A, B, or C, or turn the handpan into a commodity. I can't do that because that's just not who I am. Now, I understand that some people, because we're all so different, some people just want a one-click purchase on Amazon, and right now it's a risky thing to do with handpans because there aren't a ton of really good, reputable makers on these platforms. But that's the only way I know how to do it. So the content on my website, and I do partner with a number of just amazing handpan makers. And so you can actually purchase a handpan through my website. And it's curated, and it's meant to be a powerful experience of awakening people's senses through, hopefully really nice music, really beautiful demo videos, and just poetic language that will make you, that will give you a sense for what it feels like to play that specific instrument. So that's been super meaningful to do that.
In regards to, you mentioned earlier as well, the golden age of handpans. We said we're going to dive into that, and I don't want to let that one go. So can you tell me why you think that? And I mean, like we discussed earlier, you've been in the handpan, I don't know what you want to call it, scene, environment for quite a while. And I think your perspective on this would be interesting.
So what I mean by that is, up till now, and I'm gonna just speak in general because
Sure.
there's always exceptions, but generally up till now, every builder, every maker has been in it for the right reasons. So that's the first thing. There was no guarantees in making handpans. Um, it takes an incredible amount of time to learn how to tune steel. So these guys would devote several years of their lives before they could even sell, an instrument. So I think first they were in for the right reasons. Second, a lot of the handpan makers up till now, um, were doing 100% of the process. And what I mean is, today it's easy to buy handpan shells from a third party, and to tune it. I mean, it's not easy, but it's an available resource. Whereas in the early days, and really sort of up till now, although that's changing, every handpan builder had to figure out, okay, uh, where am I going to get my steel? Where am I going to do the gas nitriding process? Where am I going to, figure out the layouts of the scales, which size, which tools, which processes, how long to let it curate. So there's all these variables that all these guys sort of owned. They all had their own special recipe, their own special ingredient. And I think that's incredibly good for us handpan players, because we benefited from the diversity, of all these guys, of all that they made, and as opposed to, maybe in 20, 30 years, there may only be a few handpan makers worldwide who own the majority of the market, who mass produce certain aspects or who outsource certain aspects. And so I think what it does is it's a less meaningful and thus less impactful experience.
It feels like it's almost like a pivotal point at the moment. I've just seen videos coming out of China where I think they're being mass produced. I haven't really looked into it, to be honest, but it just feels like that point in time. And not saying that's wrong or right or anything like that. I'm just kind of thinking back to one of the things that really drew me to the handpan in the beginning, and that was crafted by hand, and it wasn't all about profit, and it was more about creating something, and then for that thing to be kind of passed on to someone else, and then for that person to be able to find those simple joys that we discussed. So it does seem like it's a pivotal point at the moment, and I guess, yeah, now I better understand why you think this is the golden age.
And again, like, that's what I say, because I am drawn to these extraordinary connections. If more, cheap mass-produced handpans give more people the opportunity to belong, because, back to the tension that we talked about earlier. If handpans are rare, if handpans are very expensive, then they're not very accessible. And we know how it feels, to be in, and I think to be on the inside, to be insiders. And I think if we think back to when we were out, when we were outsiders, we wanted in, and I think that, we have to be afraid, we have to be careful of that self-preservation instinct, making rules that are impossible to follow or standards that are impossible to meet.
Mm-hmm.
We were once given the chance to belong, to get in. And so we should also extend that chance to others.
I totally agree. And I feel like there is definitely, something positive to be said about more people being able to have the chance to feel like that and to spread the beauty of the instrument as well. It's just an interesting topic, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So What's on the horizon for you at the moment? Because you produce music as well, and I think you mentioned that you recently became self-employed.
Yep, it's been over a year now of being self-employed. It's been such an interesting journey. I think where I'm at is I see the risk of turning this thing, a self-employment, um, into just another rat race. I mean, you leave the
Mm-hmm.
corporate world because you want more freedom, but you can turn your company, your business, into just another trap.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my goal is to grow my business better, not bigger. Um, and so it's to have just a selection of handpans that I feel really, really good about people I love on my website for folks to check out and purchase if they so choose. It's to make meaningful podcast episodes that will inspire people and um, invite them to belong, to be a part of this thing that's been so special to me. And really, overall, just be content with keeping it small. I have no intention to turn this into something that I might resent at some point. If you think,
Yes, sounds like you need a lot of focus for what you're doing. You're really trying to keep your finger on the pulse kind of thing, and try to make sure you're keeping track of the way you're doing things so that you do build things the right way.
yeah, and you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. In entrepreneurship, there's this hustle culture.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you can never get enough of what doesn't fulfill you. And, more money, more visibility, more satisfying projects, that's all good. But if we all look in our own lives, there are a very few essential things that matter a lot. And typically it's the quality of your relationships, um, and your own well-being. So through quiet time and contemplative practice and just living in the moment, right? This super cliche phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what growth can be an incredible thing. But I think that it can also distract us from the very essential, valuable things in our lives.
Yeah. I feel like, especially in regard this, I feel like there's a link between this and like Stoic philosophy, for example, when
Mm-hmm.
they say, being able to live with a little bit less, just so that you can appreciate kind of where you're at, and so that you can live like that. You still will survive, and being able to kind of appreciate that you're alive and experience every day not only to its fullest, but just to have an experience, of being alive every day. I think that's such an important thing that when you're inside this hustle, it can easily become overlooked when you're always trying to get bigger, better, get more things, or whatever it might be. Just wherever, if your mind's not in this kind of place where you're able to recognize those simple joys, those small beauties.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I resonate so strongly with that because I feel like I'm at a very similar point in my journey, and I really, I'm relaunching the podcast at the moment. This is going to be one of the new episodes, so I'm really excited about. That's why I got so excited before our chat today, and I feel as though I really want to do things right this time. I found my niche, I guess, for lack of a better word, but I found the thing that really, makes me feel good inside. And the most important element of that is actually to be able to be of service and to somehow help others, whatever that might mean to me. So I feel like it is very important to just keep track of where we are and where we're heading. And, it's not easy, but it definitely, it's worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's awesome that you have renewed passion because it is hard, especially with podcasting, because podcasting is one of these terms that means everything and it means nothing. You know, there are podcasts produced by NPR and This American Life and super heavily produced content with, you know, a team of a dozen writers and engineers and producers. And there's one man podcasts where you do all aspects of the show, especially in a kind of setup where you have interviews and conversations, you know, scheduling those interviews, preparing your questions. Um, it can be really draining. And I think through that hustle, we can lose the vision. Um, and it sounds like, you know, it's a healthy thing to take some breaks. And, you know, in retrospect, I really wish I took the summer off of my podcast, which I sort of did anyways, but I just didn't
Hmm.
make that official because I needed space. I needed space to recharge my own creative battery in order to
Mm.
produce meaningful, you know, episodes. Um,
I feel like there's a sense of, I don't know what it is, but it builds something. Not I'm not sure if hustle's the right way to put what I'm specifically talking about, but I think when it comes to like discipline, having like a consistency of episodes, I feel like just the practice of that would build something kind of within myself. And I see the podcast as like, I feel like it's a very nice investment because through conversations, you really, I don't know, for me, anyways, I feel like I'm really doing something that I love doing. And it's just like playing the handpan. So I think, yeah, I don't know. There's like an aspect of discipline and personal lessons, I guess, that you can really draw from anything that you do. Like I'm sure there's plenty of lessons within, you know, from playing the handpan in your journey through that have correlated to your own life. So yeah, it's
yeah.
interesting.
Well, I think that you're right. It is so satisfying to create what, right? Whether you create a podcast episode or you create a song or you take a photograph or you know, do a film, you know, videography. Um, I partly think we are made to create. So, um, it is a worthy cause, you know, even the discipline is a worthy thing to have, to intentionally hold yourself to a certain schedule or standard. That's a worthy thing.
Do you feel like taking the breaks like helps? Like is a kind of like a not a strategy, but like a way to kind of stop things becoming like more losing passion?
So I've heard you speak about Seth Godin in previous episodes, so I'm going to kind of point to what he says, and that has helped me a lot. So the two questions that Seth Godin asks or asks you to ask about your own project is one, what's it for? Two, who's it for?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, applied to my own podcast, what's it for? This is not work. This is not a monetized, it's not a business venture. My
Mm-hmm.
podcast is a passion project. And
Mm-hmm.
so if the goal is for it to be meaningful, then I will allow myself to take some liberties and to allow myself space to regroup and schedule the conversations that I want to have with the people I want to chat with. Um, Now, apply that same question. If it was work, if you were employed to produce a podcast, what's it for? Well, you know, there's an expectation, there's a purpose. And so it changes the strategy entirely. And then obviously who's it for is it's going to tend to be for people who are kind of like us. So for me, I don't care about comparing handpan brands. I don't care about gathering the latest information about handpans and handpan gatherings. I just want to hear people's stories. So that's what people are going to get through the podcast. And that's not for everybody, right? Some people are not going to resonate with the deep conversations and the topics that are explored. Um, but it's because it's specific that it's meaningful. Because if it was general, then anyone could do it.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And I think allowing things to happen naturally and to do things in a natural way, it really it becomes more authentic, and it's something that you're creating that's it's for you, but you're also serving other people with that. That it's just like this cup overflowing kind of thought of when everything's overflowing with you and you're doing things for the right reasons and you're aligned with everything and it's happening naturally, and there's no kind of, you're not forcing it. Everything feels kind of right, and you're following your intuition with it. I think that overflows, and other people, that really affects other people, and I think that's a great thing.
Well, I think you're right. I think humans are very sensitive to authenticity and truthfulness, right? Like most of us have had the experience of walking up to a car dealership and there's a car salesman approaching us, and you can tell within the first 3 seconds of that interaction whether they're genuine or not. So we have this like, Spider-Man like sense. We pick up on these things, and maybe not all of us. Maybe some of us are oblivious to it, and we all have our own biases. But the way I look at it is that's the only way it can be. Otherwise, you will resent yourself for doing something that's not meaningful for you. I'm sure you get just as much from each of your podcast conversations personally as you get from sharing it publicly. There's a lesson there. And like for everyone listening who's not maybe a podcaster, which I'm assuming is most listeners, there's this anticlimactic thing that happens when you've worked on a podcast episode and you've thought so much about it. You've been so inspired doing the editing and producing this nice little packaged product, and then you publish it. And it's very anticlimactic. It's very not sensational of an experience. It's released, that it's free. Here you go. Fly into, like a bird that flies into the sky. But there's not this earth-shattering, celebratory thing that happens. It's a very unconsequential action at the time. Do you relate with that?
I feel like, yeah, definitely. I like to have little mini celebrations though. So like after this podcast, I'll probably like do something to celebrate. I don't know.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's just something small, and it's just like, because I haven't actually relaunched the podcast yet, but I'm looking for, wouldn't say looking forward to, but I think it would be a nice moment when the podcast is released and it's like a little mini celebration, because I feel like those kind of things help, I don't know, push that anti-climax in the other direction a little bit, because it is quite full on sometimes when you just send things into the abyss,
I think that's an excellent idea, and if you're okay with it, I'm gonna apply it to my own experience podcasting. It's very healthy too, because you do put a lot of work into doing this, and so it's worth celebrating.
Yeah, I made this decision in my life recently, and it's been something that's been troubling me for a while, because it was this kind of back and forth between trying to, come up with, because I sold all my things and I left on this big journey a couple of years ago, and I've been trying to come up with a way to make some money so that I can survive, so I can kind of live the life that I want to live. And I recently was faced with this. I found a way to make a lot of money online, but I knew that it wouldn't really fulfill me. And I had this podcast on the other end, which I'm not sure when I'll be able to kind of have things going to a point where I'm supported. But I just feel like it's worth doing anyways, because I really just want to make something special and put it out there. So I find it very interesting. But I do believe in not doing something because you need to get something back from it. It needs to be like a genuine thing that you really put out there into the world for its own sake. I just really resonate with what we were talking about in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there are some economic realities, right, of living in capitalist countries. I mean, you have, food, housing, transportation, utilities, clothes, right? Like we all need those things, and money does not grow on trees. So we do have to compromise in our ideals. But also, if you've got this thing inside of you that needs to come out, you can try to repress it for a while, but ultimately, it's got to come out. And I think that, the tragedy of history sometimes is there are certain books that have become classics, which were published after the death of the author, and they thought it wasn't good enough. And yet the world unanimously recognize the genius of their work. And you kind of wish that you could tell that author during their lifetime, thank you, that impacted me. So it's a grand comparison, and I don't claim to have anywhere the amount of influence or even goodness to give to the world. But I'm sure you've experienced it too. It's really good to hear from someone that you have blessed them in however small a way that may be, that you've impacted their lives. And that is a worthy pursuit. I think worth sacrificing on certain other things in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. I just want to say thank you so much for having this chat with me today, Sylvain. I really wanted to know what some of these podcasts were, because you said you're a podcast junkie. And what are you into? What would you say would be some interesting stuff to check out in regards to podcasts or books or anything?
Yeah. Okay. So we'll start with podcasts. The one show that got me into podcasting was over 10 years ago. It was probably 14 years ago. It's a show called Stuff You Should Know. It's one
That's
of
a good
the
one.
top ranked podcasts in Podcasts app. And quite frankly, English is a second language for me. And I feel like these guys, Josh and Chuck on this show, I've learned so many idioms, so many expressions through them. And the beauty of podcasting is if you listen to someone's voice for so many hours, you feel like they're your best friend. You feel like you know them intimately. So this podcast, Stuff You Should Know, is very dear to my heart. There's a few others. More recently, The Ground Up Show from Matt Diavella. I don't know if you've heard of that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like that a lot. 99% Invisible is both totally fascinating to me, but also I can't listen too much because it makes me feel bad about my own podcasts. It's the kind of podcast that's so well produced. It could be a radio show. I think there's, a big budget, an incredible amount of talent in storytelling and crafting soundscapes, and just a powerful experience. Man, if anyone out there has not listened to Serial, just go down the season 1, and next time you're on an international flight, instead of having your eyes hurt at this low resolution screen in front of you, just close your eyes, listen to like 10 hours of Serial. It's a kind of true crime podcast, and that 10-hour flight will go in the blink of an eye.
You said you were into philosophy earlier. Have you heard of that Philosophize This podcast?
No. Tell me about it.
It's amazing. It's really well put together, and this guy goes over different philosophies throughout the ages, I guess. And he just speaks about them in a way that's easily digestible, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
In this world where there's some real crazy things going on, and a lot of things are, very flashy. This is a very simple podcast, and it just gives you a deeper understanding into like philosophy. I really like it. You should check it out.
I will.
And what about books? Are there anything you've read recently that you've really enjoyed, something that stood out, or is there anything that you would give to someone else, or is there a particular book that you have given quite a lot?
Let's see. So what I'm reading right now is a book called The Sacred Enneagram. I don't know if the Enneagram concept has popped up in Australia yet. It's
Not sure.
It's a niche interest, but it's kind of the way I understand it, it's an ancient wisdom around personalities, human personalities, and it helps us to find our true self, and what the best version of ourselves could be. So there's 9 types. There's a diagram called the Enneagram with 9 different points. And it's a book that goes into that. Now, the value of this is we interact with people day in and day out. And the reality is we each see the world very differently from one another. And also how we see ourselves in the world is different. So how do we connect with other people? This book has helped me to better understand my wife and the way she looks at the world, and to better empathize with that.
That sounds
great.
great. Yeah.
What I'm reading right now.
And it's going well. It's a good one.
Yeah, this is one that I'm going to have to reread a few times to sort of really digest.
Sounds like it, yeah.
But yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
Cool. Definitely check them out. Well, just wanted to say thanks again for coming on the show, Sylvain. I wanted to know if I'd be able to, and you feel free to say no as well. I wanted to know if I'd be able to use a couple of tracks from one of your albums to play during the episode, just so maybe people got a deeper understanding of you through your playing in some weird way.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much. It's been really cool to have this chat, and I think we touched on some amazing things. And I'm really looking forward to throwing it out into the abyss.
Yeah, well, thank you,
and
Michael.
Celebrating.
Yes, thank you for that tidbit of just lifestyle design. I think that's going to enhance podcasting for me.
Lifestyle design, I wouldn't go that far.
Well, celebrating after you've done something you feel good about, I like that. Yeah. But yeah, man, thank you for reaching out. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how beneficial what you're doing is, for the rest of us. Like, I've listened to a couple of your episodes, but I'm really dying to like listen to them all, because I think there's actually a few guests of yours that I know personally.
Really? Like who?
Well, I think there's a few handpan players and handpan related people.
Ah, cool.
I've just seen their names in the kind of browsing through that list.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really invigorating to meet you, because we've never met, and to have a chat. So thank you for being brave enough to reach out to a stranger and orchestrating this. And last but not least, I would be honored to have you on my podcast sometime soon, if you're willing.
That sounds amazing, and I'd love to join you on the show. And yeah, I just feel like giving you a hug now, but I'll give you a digital hug, and
yes,
I'll let you go. But we'll stay in touch, and that sounds like another chat. Why not?
I'm very glad we can look forward to our next conversation then. Thanks for everything, Michael. Well, I hope you enjoyed this different kind of episode. If you did, I encourage you to subscribe to the Good People Effect podcast, where Michael interviews super interesting people beyond just the world of handpans. I thought he was a very thoughtful interviewer, and I think you'll really enjoy the pace and the style of his show. Okay, so how did this feel? A bit different from usual, huh? This conversation was not originally intended to be published under the Handpan podcast, but I'm glad I get to pull the curtain and show you the behind the scenes, because there's more to that story. I had been wondering how to share this for a while, and then this came up, so it felt like it was an organic way to make it happen. So thank you for allowing me. Now that we're done with part 1, I invite you to check out part 2, which is me interviewing Michael. So back to the normal format of this show. You already heard Michael as the interviewer in this episode, so you know what a great conversationalist he is, and also how charming his accent is. I think you'll find that next episode particularly impactful, not only because of the amazing adventures he's been on, but because of how vulnerable he is, opening up and sharing personal lessons he's had to learn the hard way. Again, there's more to that story. That's in part 2, so I will see you there. As always, show notes and more goodies, as you heard on this podcast, are at thehandpanpodcast.com. Thanks for listening to this episode, and talk to you in the next one.